What's up and welcome to FPL Today. I'm JNO. Welcome to the channel and welcome to a new series where we look at World Cup fantasy football. Only issue is I haven't picked a fantasy football World Cup game yet, but we will get to that, and as soon as that is done there'll be a video telling you all about the league you can join, and then we can start looking at some prices and values. But right now what we're going to do leading into the World Cup is look at the group stages and look at the players that could do well in those stages of the World Cup and get us fantasy football points. But before we get into the rest of the video, if you are interested in World Cup fantasy football and want some help and advice from a great community we've built here on FPL Today, consider subscribing and hitting that notification bell so you're informed when we go live and when there are videos out on YouTube as well. So we are going to start off with Group A because it makes the most sense to start off with Group A, and that is the group that has Egypt, Russia, Saudi Arabia and Uruguay. And to be honest, there is some potential here for some great picks. There is of course going to be some cheap value options in that Saudi Arabia side, but to be honest I don't think there's going to be many options in the Saudi Arabia side, to be fair. You probably didn't need me to tell you that though. We are going to start with Egypt in this one as we look at a side with potentially one of the best players in the world right now, Mohamed Salah, and potentially a team that could give us some value for option choices. Egypt qualified for the World Cup with a record of 4 wins, 1 draw and 1 loss, with goals for at 8 and goals conceded at 4 with 2 clean sheets, which shows a very defensive minded side which could or could not benefit Mohamed Salah. Because if they play defensive against sides that push forward against them, that could leave space behind for Mohamed Salah, which of course would be a great benefit for a player with his pace. We saw what he did against Roma when there was plenty of space behind the defence. He will look for those balls over the top and potentially score a hatful in the group stages. Now for me, unfortunately, I couldn't see any good options other than Mohamed Salah in that Egyptian side, purely because he is the standout player, he's the best player in that side, and everything else seems to kind of be built around being defensive. So potentially there's some good defensive options there, but with Uruguay in the group and potentially Russia, who we don't know how they'll perform because they've not played competitive football leading into this World Cup, I'm not too confident with Egyptian defenders just yet, but of course that could change as we get closer to the occasion. Quickly just going over Mohamed Salah's stats if you have been living under a rock. 34 appearances in the Premier League with 32 goals, 10 assists, shots per game at 4 per game and an average rating at 7.69. If you can fit Mohamed Salah in and he's not too expensive, which could be the case because he plays for Egypt, then Mohamed Salah could be a good choice, and then you transfer him out if Egypt don't get past the group stage. We then look at Russia, who are the hosts for this World Cup, and because of that have only played friendlies. Now this was a lot harder for me to get the stats for, but Russia over the period from 2016 to 2018 in friendlies have a record of 3 wins, 4 draws and 4 losses. Goals for at 18, goals against at 16. Clean sheets out of that many games they only got 2. So I wouldn't necessarily look for clean sheets in that Russia defence. I personally don't also like putting faith in a side that haven't played competitive football leading into the World Cup either. You kind of have the two situations where they could not perform that well because they've not been playing competitive football, or you could get a situation like South Korea in 2002, I believe, where they outperformed themselves because it was in their home nation. So they're definitely one to keep an eye on. However, defence doesn't look like a good option for me. Because of friendlies as well, there's probably been some rotation in that side as well, so the stats aren't as reliable looking at those players. However, because of the other teams in the group, there's the potential for them to go through the group stages, and there's the potential for a cheap option in that Russia side to come out. So keep an eye on them for sure. The options I've picked out, we have Allen, and this is going to be even worse than the Premier League because we know what I was like with Fantasy Premier League and pronouncing names. So now I've got the World Cup. I'm going to butcher this, but Dzgova? Sorry to anyone Russian. And the stats we're looking at are the stats for the season just gone, and he had 20 appearances in the Russian Premier League with 3 goals, 6 assists, shots per game at 2 and an average rating at 6.80. And in Euro 2012 he actually scored 3 goals, so he does have some experience scoring in the big competitions. The other one we're looking at is Alexandra Kokorin. Hopefully that was better than the last one. He has, in the Russian Premier League, had 21 appearances with 10 goals, 3 assists, shots per game at 2.9, an average rating at 7.30, and in World Cup 2014 he did score 1 goal, so also has the experience of scoring a goal in a major competition. So those are the 2 Russian players at this moment that I'm looking at. We now move on to Saudi Arabia, and unfortunately I cannot get enough stats or have enough faith in naming any one of their players for this group stage. They have a record of 6 wins, 1 draw and 3 losses, and they actually beat Australia to this World Cup. So there is the potential that there could be a standout player, but off of the stats that I could find, there is no one I'm going to be suggesting to you. They've also gone through a turbulent time with changes in manager recently, qualifying for the World Cup with the manager who got them there, then announcing he is leaving after they qualified, and his replacement then being sacked. They are also considered by the bookies one of the least likely teams to win this tournament with Panama. So I wouldn't really go looking too deep into that Saudi Arabia side for some options unless you're looking for some bench fodder. And then finally we have Uruguay, probably the favourites to win this group. They have a record going into this one from the World Cup qualification stage of 9 wins, 4 draws and 5 losses. They've scored 32 goals and conceded 20, getting 7 clean sheets in the process, so there's potential for points in defence and in attack. However, I don't fancy their defence against the pace of someone like Mohamed Salah, but there's definitely options in this side because of the quality of this group to get you some good points before we get into the knockout stages. Uruguay actually finished 2nd in the South American qualifying group. They conceded 20 across 18 games, which isn't too bad. Scored almost an average of 2 per game. In the group stages, it could be worth even looking at 2 players from Uruguay, just so you've got budget to go for some heavy hitters elsewhere. There is, of course, an asterisk on their form. However, there was a poor run of 6 games with just 1 win in that 6. And also the defence is quite ageing and slow. So, of course, as soon as they come up against some fast players who can run in behind, aka Mohamed Salah, they could suffer. Edinson Cavani and Luis Suarez are of course the obvious targets, but my outside pick is also going to be mentioned in this one. And out of the 2 of Edinson Cavani and Luis Suarez, I've decided to focus on Edinson Cavani because he's had a great season for PSG. And of course Luis Suarez does have his temperament issues and could potentially get bookings. Disciplinary has always been a problem for Luis Suarez. So Edinson Cavani with 30 appearances in the French league with 28 goals and 6 assists. His shots per game was at 3.3 and he got an average rating of 7.69. His World Cup in 2014 saw 1 goal and 1 assist as well. So again, experience in scoring in a World Cup. Potentially he could have a very good group stage. And then we have the outside pick, a player that from everything I've read, and you've got to understand that I have not watched every Uruguay game, I've not even watched one, but everything I've read suggests that Georgian de Arrasqueta, again apologies if I butchered the name, could be an outside bet for the starting 11, as the manager of Uruguay has given up on Gaston Ramirez as a playmaker. However, I couldn't find much in stats to back this up as well. It's just what I read in articles. If he is a starter, and of course we'll have the friendlies before the World Cup to kind of guess if this is the case. Georgian de Arrasqueta did have in 2017 season, because the South American seasons follow a different pattern than the European ones. He had 11 appearances with 3 goals and 2 assists, with a shots per game at 2.3 and an average rating at 6.91. But in 2016 season, he had 9 goals and 9 assists in the season, which is why potentially he could be the playmaker for Uruguay that is getting those assists for Edinson Cavani and Luis Suarez. But that, of course, is an outside pick, and I'm imagining his price will be quite low, which could be good for your World Cup fantasy football sides. And to quickly finish off the group, I believe the estimated group finishes for this group will be Uruguay at first, with Egypt getting second, that second place through to the knockout stages. Russia just finding themselves outside of that, and Saudi Arabia being the whipping boys of this group. Of course, that is off of everything I've read. I'm just imagining Mohamed Salah could score a few against the defences of Russia and Saudi Arabia, giving them the wins in that one. And they are set up to be quite defensive. So 2 or 3 goals from Salah should see Egypt win those games. And then with Uruguay, I personally think they've got enough in this group to come out on top and go into the knockout stages with some good form, and hopefully for them an easier opponent. Anyway guys, thank you so much for tuning into this episode as always. If you've enjoyed this episode and looking forward to the reviews of the other groups in the World Cup, then please hit that like button, and also if you haven't already, subscribe and hit that notification bell. All your support over this World Cup period will be greatly appreciated. It's actually harder to do research for this because stats and data and articles are all over the place, so any support is hugely appreciated. I've been JNO, this has been FPL Today, and remember, it's all about the game. Man, it's been a while since I've done a video.